explanations of conformity. So you need to be aware of the three types of conformity: internalization, identification, and compliance. And the two explanations for the specification are normative social influence and informational social influence. So the types of conformity then. So we have compliance, which is where you publicly change. So you go along with the group, but you don't accept their point of view privately. So it's a public change, but not a change to your underlying attitude. Identification is where you want to be like the group, you want to adapt that attitude because you want to be associated with that group, and again it leads to a public change. Internalization is where you go along with the group because you accept their beliefs as accurate, so it leads to both a public change but also a private change to your underlying attitudes. So you accept the group's norm as your own and you internalize them. So you could get asked a question that's a multiple choice where you have to which one best describes one of the types of conformity. So for example, which best describes internalization. So you should have C, the individual changes his or her public and private beliefs. You might get this, identify which two are types of conformity. So that would be compliance and identification. So it's important that you read that correctly. So it says which are types of conformity, not explanations, and you know that you have to shade in two of the boxes. So moving on to explanations then. So normative social influence is where we conform in order to gain approval. So it's about going along with group norms. It's a desire to be liked by others and to not look foolish. So we want to gain approval and avoid rejection from the group. And generally normative influence is linked to compliance. An important condition for normative social influence is that we must believe that we are under surveillance by the group. We are being watched and we are being judged for our behaviour. Whereas informational social influence is where we conform because we believe that the group is correct, that they have the right information, and we conform because we have a desire to be right. So it's when we don't necessarily know how to behave, we look to others for guidance, and that explains why internalization happens. So the human desire to be right means that informational social influence is more likely to happen if it is not clear to us how we should behave in a certain situation. So we will look to others for guidance on how to behave. So in terms of evaluation then, so we have supporting evidence for both normative and informational social influence. So normative social influence has supporting evidence. So it's found that adolescents, that when they were exposed to a message that they believed the majority of their peers didn't smoke, they were less likely to start smoking. So they went along with the group norms of not smoking. We also have research support for informational social influence. So studies have shown that exposure to what other people think is an important influence on stereotypes. So research found that when participants were exposed to negative information about African Americans, which they believed that was held by the majority, they later reported negative beliefs about a black individual themselves. However, we have contradictory evidence, so we have individual differences in normative social influence. So some research has shown that normative social influence does not affect everyone's behaviour in the same way. So some people are less concerned about being liked, and therefore they are less affected by normative social influence than others who care about what others think and care about being rejected. So such people are described as N-affiliators, and they found that students high in the needs of affiliation were more likely to conform. So it shows that some people are more likely to conform and comply than others. Also, we have individual differences in informational social influence. So it does not affect everyone in the same way. So in Ash's study, which we will move on to, so the next bit of social influence, it is found that students were less conformist than other participants. So students conformed on 28% of the trials, whereas other participants conformed on 37%. So it showed that there is a range of individual differences. Also, when it was replicated and using scientists and engineering students, they found very little conformity. We'll look at that in a bit more detail in the next part, but it's due to they were more confident in their ability to judge the size of the lines, so therefore they didn't conform. So it shows that we have individual differences, and these two explanations do not apply to everyone. So yes, there is supporting evidence, but also it is important to take into account individual differences. So we could get a question like this: briefly outline and evaluate normative social influence as an explanation for conformity. So this one's been very specific in asking you to talk about normative social influence and not about informational social influence. So 4 marks, what it is and a brief outline. So 2 marks on your AO1 description and 2 marks on your evaluation. Equally, you could be asked a 16 marker on outline and evaluate explanations of conformity. Now it's really important that you read that question carefully, because students will often get types and explanations confused. So the types are the 3 types, so compliance, internalization and identification, whereas the explanations are your 2 explanations: normative social influence and informational social influence. So it's really important that you read the questions carefully in the exam.